Welcome to Lean Into Excellence, a Workstream Consulting podcast. I'm Liz Crescenti.
And I'm Marco Bonilla.
And we will be your hosts as we embark on our continuous improvement journey. Welcome back to another episode of Lean Into Excellence. I'm your host, Liz Crescenti.
And I'm Marco Bonilla.
And today on our episode, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Doug Bruce of Bruce Data Services. Hi, Doug.
Hey. I don't know. Those are some big boots to fill with that kind of intro. I'm a myth and legend of my own mind, maybe.
Hey, it's somewhere. That's all that matters.
Hey, thanks for having me today. I appreciate being here to talk to you all about one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, we're super excited. For the audience, do you mind just jumping in quick to your bio before we get started?
Sure. My name's Doug Bruce, as you mentioned, with Bruce Data Services. I am an independent consultant. I've been working with Workstream for many years. Have worked in industry and as an independent consultant, doing Lean Six Sigma work for well over 20 years, let's say, give or take. I've worked in many different industries. I've worked in healthcare, biopharma, med device. I've worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing. I've also worked within the electronics industry, in consumer electronics, defense electronics, aerospace and defense, and smattering around many other industries, done some retail, done some warehousing and distribution, all sorts of different things. But it all comes back to applying the same principles and the same ideas. And that's why I'm excited to talk to you guys today, because the one thing that spans all these different industries and everything is process mapping, is understanding the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Doug, great having you here. It's longtime buddies. Doug and I have known each other for a long time. Doug, talk about process mapping. It's really appropriate that you're on this week, because last week we touched upon how a process is everything, right? Everything we do is a process. So it's really appropriate that you're here this week talking about process mapping, doing a deeper dive in some of the knowledge base. Any examples that you might have that was very memorable?
Oh, we're going to talk a ton of examples throughout this call. That's one of the things I love, is the way people learn and relate is through stories. And all the examples that we've collected over the years are nothing but stories. I mean, when it comes to process mapping, I have a quote that I don't know if I ripped this off from somebody or if it's my own quote, but I have a philosophy that everything in life is a process and all processes can be improved. Right?
I think you took that from me.
I think
Doug.
You're the original. Doug, you're the original speaker of those words.
We'll argue over attribution over a drink, but if it's true though. Everything we do in life follows a process. Let's say you go to the supermarket, right? We go to the supermarket once a week or to do our regular grocery shopping. We have a routine that we follow. We have a standard path, if you will, that we walk through the supermarket. So I send my teenager to the supermarket, and he wants to go get his favorite food, ice cream, right? So I say, oh, here's the shopping list. Get some of these other things too. So he goes to the supermarket. What's the first thing he does? He goes to the freezer case and grabs the ice cream. Now he's walking around the supermarket the rest of the time with the ice cream in the carriage melting, trying to figure out the rest of the store. Well, we've probably figured this out if you're an experienced shopper. Your process says do the middle aisles first and hit the cold food on your way out, so it's not sitting in your shopping cart melting, right? That's just one example of a process that we all follow. We all have different ways that we execute that process, but we probably do that process. We run that routine every time we go to the supermarket.
Even subconsciously, I feel like you're still following a process. But I will say, in terms of the supermarket, my process is opening up an app and adding to cart. So.
Yeah, that was pretty nifty. But once we could go back to the supermarket, I remember waiting in line outside the supermarket because they were only letting certain number of people in at a time, and then you had to stand in line 6 feet apart. Thank goodness we're not there anymore. But here's just another example, and Marco, you'll probably relate to this when we do training classes. My basic training example for process mapping is, imagine you have a friend visiting from a foreign country and you're about to go to the drive-through, right? And this friend from the foreign country's never been in a drive-through in their life. Well, if you were to explain this to somebody, how would you explain it? There are various steps or phases that you go through in the drive-through, right? You pull into the restaurant, you get in line in the drive-through, you pull up to the order kiosk or where the menu is, and you place your order. Then you pull forward, you wait in line till you get up to the window, you pay, you receive the food, you drive away. That's a process. Now, we all follow the standard process because all the drive-throughs are built the same. There are some minor modifications. I mean, some McDonald's you go to, they've got 2 lanes for the order window. Sometimes during heavy business times, you go and they've got a separate window for paying and another window. You pull forward a little farther and you get your food at the second window, right? So when I'm training process mapping, I use this as a very simple analogy, because process mapping comes down to steps in a process. And then there are points in time in the process where you have to make a decision. All right. You pull up to that menu kiosk and, oh boy, do you have a decision. If you're like me, you get in the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru in the morning, there is no decision. You know exactly what you're getting. You pull up, you order it, bada beam, bada boom, and you're out of there, right? But if you hit that drive-thru on a Saturday morning and you end up behind the minivan, the minivans that I'm talking about that have little stick figures in the back window with like 7 little kids. They just come from their youth soccer program. You're going to be waiting in that line for a while because their decision-making process is going to be complex, right? I just want my black coffee.
But it's going to involve munchkins. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Munchkins for the munchkins. That's right. Right. So that decision-making process in a process map is represented as a diamond. So the steps of the process are represented as a rectangle, and the decision-making points are represented by a diamond. Now, I didn't mention this before, but really the power behind process mapping is multifaceted, right? Number one, you document what we're supposed to be doing. Number two, you standardize the way the process is executed. Maybe there's many different ways to execute a process. So another example might be, say, in the electronics industry, you have to you populate your circuit board and you have to put a conformal coat down over the top of the circuit board. Maybe the router or the job instruction just says conformal coat circuit board. Well, that could mean any of a dozen different things. What type of conformal coat are you using? What process are you using to apply the conformal coat? To what specification should the conformal coat be applied? But I've seen many instances where the job instruction just says, apply conformal coat. Well, now as a new employee, Marco, if you're a new employee and you come along and you're reading this job instruction, you look at that and you're like, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? So you look to your trainer, your on-the-job trainer, and you say, what are we supposed to do here? And you learn by doing on the job. But there's probably many different ways to do that application process. Do you start in the middle and do concentric circles? Do you go side to side? Do you just spray in one place? Or
Doug, and even if if you're not new, even if you get experienced people to do it, you're going to notice they're going to do it 2 different ways, 3 different ways, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. They're just going to do it based on, especially if it's a wide open request, right? There's no specific answers or details to the process step. So, Doug, tell us, how soon when you go to a client site do you dig into a process map, and who do you get involved in process mapping?
Marco, great question. I think you agree with this probably, but it's like the very first thing. You scope the project, and then you have to understand what's going on. And the project map is the process map is the tool that I take out of my toolkit to understand and document all the learnings as I'm learning about a new customer, a new process. For instance, if a client has engaged us to improve a sales call, no, I'm sorry, not a sales call, to improve an inbound call center process. Well, what does the inbound call center process consist of? Well, gee, where do calls come from? Where do new orders come from in the call center? The call center processes all new invoices or all new requests that come in. So maybe they come in via fax. Maybe they come in via telephone. Maybe they're voicemail messages that were left overnight. Maybe they're chat from the chatbot on the web page. So I worked with a client once where they had 6 different inbound processes that were all feeding into the call center, and it was the call center's responsibility for getting all this information into the manufacturing execution system. And funny thing, they engaged us because they were having dropped calls or dropped messages. Customers would just call them and say, "Hey, I placed my order. I sent you the fax, or I was on hold and I got dropped off of hold." Some of us have maybe had that happen to us where we're waiting on hold 10, 15, 20 minutes. All of a sudden, click, click, and you get hung up on. How does that make you feel as a customer, right? Not very satisfied.
A lot of 4-letter words.
Yeah, but this is a family-friendly podcast, so we'll just leave that to the imagination, right?
I didn't give examples.
No, but it's all about the customer journey. It's about the flow of information, and it's about the product that you're expecting in return from this engagement. So in the case of that call center, what we come to find out, we started mapping, or we started documenting all these different ways. If you could picture a funnel coming down into a single process, what was happening is customers would be complaining that they'd get hung up on after waiting in the phone queue. What would happen is the phone queue had a maximum of 5 people on hold. As soon as the 6th person got put on hold, the first person would get dropped off. So imagine you've been waiting for 15 minutes on hold, and it says you're next in line, and then all of a sudden, bloop, you get dropped off.
They had a FIFO system.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this was previously unknown. We didn't know that this restriction of maximum 5 people on hold was part of our VoIP phone system. Right? It was only through asking questions and exploring and documenting the process through process mapping that we came to understand, okay, where are we losing these customers? Under what circumstances? And actually what we did was we zeroed in and say, what time of day are we losing these customers? It was during the maximum call time. Yeah, peak call time. And when was that? Well, our shipping deadline was 4:00, so all our customers do it. So from 2 to 4, really from 3 to 4 o'clock was peak time on the phones. And that's
heavy calls.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the holidays right now. Who among us are not looking on Amazon trying to say, will this be delivered by Christmas? No, after Christmas. All right, move on to the next Amazon Prime item. So
I know now you can sort by delivery date. So you can sort now to see what will be arriving before Christmas.
Exactly. So the process map, just to summarize your question, Marco, when do you use a process map? It is the first thing. Anytime I'm engaged in a client process or my own process, anytime I want to try and improve my own process, I need to understand what it looks like. What am I dealing with here, right? A doctor will do a CAT scan or an MRI or an X-ray to understand what am I dealing with before they proceed with some procedure, right? So in a sense, it's like that. Now, we document the existing process, but we want to try and improve things. So we look at the existing process. Here's how things are happening now. And we say, we ask a couple of questions. We interrogate the process, if you will. We say, where are the hiccups? Where are the interruptions? And where are the roadblocks? Where do they exist within this process? And then the second question we ask is, if I had that magic wand that I could wave, how would I improve this process? And that gets to the point where we're talking about a future state process map. If we could wave that magic wand, what would this streamlined process look like? We would be removing all the non-value added process steps. We would try our hardest to remove all the weight in the process. We would, oftentimes, here's a classic one that hits every single company I've ever worked for: engineering change orders. Anybody that's listening to this probably has dealt and been frustrated by the engineering change order process. Well, what does it consist of? Wait, are you doing a fit, form, or function change? Do you need to notify your customers? Or is this a small minor change like a documentation change, a typo, or something like that, right? Why do we follow the same process no matter what kind of change, but if it's a documentation changing a typo or something like that on a document, we still need the same 17 signatures? That's kind of ridiculous. It's non-value added. And the more signatures you put on that ECO process, you know what happens. They start passing the buck, right? Oh, I know Marco's going to look at it, so I don't have to look at it as hard because I know Marco's really thorough.
Right,
and
right.
You get the ECO. What do you say?
Well, yeah, I know somebody else looked at it that was paying attention, so I'll just sign it off. It's a rubber stamp.
Exactly. Rubber stamp, yeah. So by understanding the process the way it runs today, if you ask yourselves, how many steps does this ECO need to go through before it gets to approved and release state? You might say, wow. Now, you might remember we worked on a process where it was a hiring process. Anytime we wanted to extend an offer for a job, the offer had to have a wet signature. We'd send that offer, FedEx it out to a potential client. They had to sign and FedEx it back to us, right? The entire process was predicated on wet signatures. And in today's, in this day and age, we have digital signatures and things like that. So we would never, if we were designing a process from the ground up, we would never design it around wet ink signatures, right? But what we have is a lot of businesses still have their legacy processes ingrained in the way they do things. So what I love about process maps is that it gives you the opportunity to interrogate of the process. Is this the best way to do it? This is the way we've always done it is like, that's like a red flag to me. When somebody says, well, this is the way we've always done it, it sends the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I'm like, ooh, all right, there's going to be benefit here.
The irony of this, that, we visit clients all the time to give these, this assistance, but you're surprised to see how many of them have never really mapped the process themselves, right? They know either their piece and not much further. And sometimes you get a group of people in a room to map a process and they can't even agree on their own process, which means it's because they're doing things differently, right? So Doug, what would you say to a business owner that says, you know what, we have SOPs in place, we have a process, we get stuff done. Why do we need to look into process mapping as a first stage of fixing something?
As I was saying before, we can have processes in place. Maybe they're legacy processes. Maybe they've been in place for many years, right? Things change. People change. Processes change. Suppliers change. And what we've been doing all along may not be reflective of what's written in our SOPs. I'll give you a couple of examples. I was with a company, and an intern basically came along and was asked to create a pictorial representation, which is what a process map basically is, create a pictorial representation of the SOP. So she dutifully sits down at her desk, she pulls up her SOP, and she starts diagramming this out. And then we challenged her. We said, okay, now we want you to take that and go out to the shop floor, go to the Gemba where the value is being created, where the work is being done. Go and see and tell me your representation of the SOP. Is it true, in fact, out on the shop floor? And lo and behold, it wasn't even close to being true. As a matter of fact, there were processes that were directly contraindicated. There were things that existed on the shop floor that were not in the SOP. There are decisions being made, things like that. she went from, I think, if I remember right, something that was about a 20-step process and came up with an updated actual process of 50 to 60 steps. And that was all because she went out and she observed what was going on. And you just can't rely on what your procedure said. A lot of companies have updates. They say, well, we need to validate or re-verify our procedures every few years, every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be. But I guarantee you, especially in today's situation of supply chain problems and things like that, that things are changing. You know, we live in a fast-paced business world. Here's just one more example. The procedure said to do this 2-part assembly. You do the first half, you do the top part, and then you do the bottom part, and you follow through this assembly. Well, this was a safety critical item, and there was an incident. I was called in to help the investigation team. Come to find out that for a number of years, the operators had been doing it not the way it was written in the SOP, but they were doing it exactly backwards. They were doing the bottom half first and building on top of that to do the top half, because in fact it was virtually impossible to do it the way the SOP was written. And when I asked, I said, well, you know, we've been doing it this way for years. Everybody knows that they're not necessarily following what's documented in the SOP. And somebody pointed out, says, well, yes, but we're told to follow our on-the-job training. So they followed the on-the-job training. Well, where does that lead you? If you have a process where you have one expert in a process and that expert goes on vacation or maybe retires, how do you follow up? How do you do that process? We had another client, I remember, that was doing a chemical process, and they were the only person that did this chemical process. They'd mix up the chemistry, they'd dip the parts in the wet solution, and they wanted to retire. It was a wafer fab process. They were ready to retire. They were the only person that did this. So the company said, oh, well, we've got a process. So the question was, what we are doing today, does it actually follow the process? Long story short, no. So what we ended up doing is attaching a GoPro to that individual and videotaped them actually doing the process. And then we could validate what they were doing versus the SOP, and we could understand where the SOP needed to be changed and updated. And now that videotape is actually available for training purposes. For
training purposes.
Else.
I was about to say, yeah absolutely.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. And let me just add one more thing around SOPs and process maps. This is a Dougism. This one really gets my goat all the time, right? You pick up an SOP, you hand it to somebody, a new employee, and say, read through this, and that's your training. Well, you just gave them a 10 or 15 or 20-page SOP, standard operating procedure. That's paragraph after paragraph of machines and equipment and processes and techniques. They have no idea what's going on.
And it's all text.
All text, right? My version of reality would be section 1.0. What's this process? Section 2.0, the scope of this process. Number 3 on the SOP should be a process map, a visual representation of what we're doing. And we haven't even talked about this. Come back for the next version of this podcast, and we could go deeper on process maps. But the high-level map, you know, at the 30,000 or the 50,000 foot version, what are the 3, 5, 7 steps of this process? Like as if I were explaining something to grandma at the Thanksgiving table, right? Right, that's at the beginning of the SOP. And then within each subsection of the SOP, you can have a detailed map at the beginning of the section.
Yeah,
a
deep dive.
Yes. Right. That would, to me, be my ideal SOP, is to have, right, I've seen some SOPs. I ask when I get to a new company, I say, do you have SOPs? Oh, yeah, we got SOPs. Do your SOPs have a visual or pictorial representation of the process? Do they have a process map? Oh, yeah, well, it's in the appendix. Where's the appendix? At the back of the document. So you're saying
No one's reading that.
No, but I'm going to read through 20 pages.
Stuff it in the appendix.
Stuff it in the appendix, yeah.
Doug, you know you're in trouble when the SOP, the paper's turning yellow.
It's curling up.
And the outside is all
water damage.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at the revisions.
And the fact that it's a hard copy tells you a lot too. Yeah. Usually they can just
Exactly. When the
Yeah.
SOP is older than you are, you know you're in trouble.
Yeah. So let me just give you as a parting shot. People are probably wondering, okay, I could teach myself process mapping. There's nothing complicated about this process. You can go out to Wikipedia, and there's lots of online tutorials and things like that, how to do this. A couple of tools one tool that I recommend, it's free, which is why I recommend it, is a website you go to. It's called draw.io, draw.io. It's a free online web browser-based drawing package that's as powerful as some of the most expensive tools like Microsoft Visio or something like that. You can create drawings in the browser, and you could download them in various different formats, and you could download them to your computer. You have all the source files, vector graphics or SVGs or any format that you want. So go check that out. If you're interested in process mapping, go to draw.io. And another
We are
thing,
not affiliated or sponsored.
not affiliated or
Just a
sponsored.
resource.
It's a free program. Nobody's going to pay me.
I like to add a little caveat to that, Doug.
Yeah.
That this is a team sport, right? So even though you're capable of doing a process map by yourself, I highly suggest you don't, because either you're going to forget something or you're going to add some of your tribal knowledge to the process. So definitely do it as a team. The key to process mapping is having someone to facilitate the flow of creating a process map.
Yeah. Oh,
I have a quick question, just as an outsider. How often should the process map be revisited? So in terms of someone walking it,
Great question.
how often would you suggest someone live it and walk it to make sure it's still relevant?
That's a great question, right?
It's a great question.
All companies have their document revision policies and things like that, and I think process maps would fall under that category for your standard business process revision schedule. However, that being said, we all know as people enmeshed in the process, people that are a part of the process, when things change, that's when it needs to be revisited, right? If you have a new supplier come on board, if somebody has a best practice, right? SOPs are good, but there's technique, there's process knowledge, there's all those sort of things. Those captured in a process map are invaluable tools for an invaluable way for communicating those best practices. So one thing I like to do is take my process map, I mentioned it earlier, and look for barriers or interruptions to the process, right? So do a deep dive in your process map and revisit wherever in your process is the hang up or the gotcha or wherever the inventory builds up, or do a deep dive there and do it frequently until you've worked out the kinks.
Yeah, process map is also a great opportunity to align yourself where am I collecting the right data at the right places, right? So just because something's going through a process doesn't mean we're collecting data. We might be going through the motions, moving things along, right? But if you're looking to improve, whether it's because the process is wasteful or your yield is very low, lack of efficiency, that process will show you where you should be collecting data, even if it's short term, so you can make improvements.
Yeah, and let me just add one thing to that. Here's a great use case for process maps. If you work in a regulated environment under regulatory requirements, like say HIPAA compliance or FINRA in the finance industry, or you're FDA regulated or something like that, these are great areas to apply both a process map in conjunction with a failure modes effects analysis or some sort of risk management tool. So use your risk management tool to identify portions of your process where you're at high risk for non-compliance. And then you could come and use a process map, do a current state process map to understand what your existing process looks like, bounce that off your risk management tool to see, are all my risks appropriately managed? These two tools used in conjunction with each other can be invaluable together.
Exactly.
Well, I think we could probably talk about process mapping all day.
Oh.
But for the sake of time, I think we're absolutely going to need to bring Doug back and have episode 2.
Oh, let's do it.
So we will We will absolutely do it. Doug, thank you so much for coming on today.
Definitely, Doug. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns, if you'd like to reach out and know a little bit more about process mapping or failure modes, effects analysis, risk analysis, or just generally anything in the continuous improvement world, feel free to reach out to me I'm Doug Bruce at brucedata.com, or reach out, of course, as the Workstream podcast. So I can be reached through Workstream at workstreamconsulting.com. And, we'd love to hear from you.
You too could hire Doug to come in and do a process map for your facility.
I'm making process mapping my 2024 mission in life. I think every company everywhere needs to do process mapping, because I guarantee you, it will find gaps holes that need to be plugged in your process.
Exactly. Good job, Doug.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Doug.
All right. Thanks for having me on the pod. Good luck with it.